to those sorts of issues. So there were these complicated and somewhat confusing legal issues that the Portland Police Association was raising in its motion to intervene. And shortly after that, the AMAC also filed a motion to intervene, arguing that they also had an interest in the outcome of this settlement agreement and how it was impacting communities in Portland. And they wanted to have a voice in this process and in this litigation as members of the community. So then that was in January of 2013 that the AMAC filed their motion. In February of 2013, Portland police shot and killed Merle Hatch, and this was an individual who was in mental health crisis and seeking treatment. And in February, again, also in February of 2013, a few days later, Judge Michael Simon, who's the district court judge who was assigned to the case when it was filed by the DOJ, issued a ruling on both the Portland Police Association's motion to intervene and the AMAC's motion to intervene.
And that ruling was that the Portland Police Association could intervene into the case because they had an interest unique from the city's interest and the DOJ's interest in the case, but that the AMAC legally did not have an interest in the case that was separate from the Department of Justice. At least that's how the judge saw it. We argued differently. But to the court's credit, the court did make up a special definition and title for the AMAC in this case, one that I haven't heard of. Have you? And that was enhanced amicus status. So amicus, or an amicus curiae, literally translates to friend of the court, and normally it's something we see where you know, an organization or a group that represents particular individuals might file a brief in a case with their opinion or view of how the case should come out or the impact on people in the community. But they don't really have a whole lot more involvement in the case than maybe filing a brief, maybe showing up at a hearing. And so what the judge did here was he specifically laid out the role that the AMAC would be allowed to play in this case, and allowed the AMAC to participate in briefing on all issues in the case, to attend hearings, to attend mediation, to participate in oral arguments to the same extent as the parties. And this is a pretty significant role to give a community organization in a lawsuit. So it was no small matter. As he said, the AMAC will have a seat at the table. And so that's a pretty big deal for the community, and it's something that we've been working throughout this process through years to try to facilitate more and more of the community engagement and to keep the community engaged, because this is a very long and lengthy process and very complicated, and that community voice is so important and critical.
So that was February. In March of 2013, the Portland police shot and killed Santiago Cisneros III. He was a 32-year-old Latino veteran who suffered from PTSD. Also in 2013, a few months later, the parties, meaning the City of Portland, the federal government, the Portland Police Association, and the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition participated in a multi-day mediation with a mediator to try and resolve some of the objections, the specific objections that the Portland Police Association and the AMAC had made to the settlement agreement that was kind of prohibiting entry from going forward, the court from just entering in the settlement agreement and making it legally enforceable at that point. And in November, after several days of mediation, both the Portland Police Association and the PPA reached an agreement regarding their objections to resolve them, and would agree to the entry of the settlement agreement, and they would deal with some of their other objections in a different way. And the AMAC also reached what we called a collaborative agreement with the city and the DOJ, saying we don't really agree with all the things in this settlement agreement, but we're not going to block and continue to object to entry. But we will still continue to advocate for parts that we think should be stronger, and continue to work on what the AMAC saw as critical pieces of police oversight and accountability that they felt the settlement agreement did not go far enough. And that was very specific and intentional because the DOJ and the city really wanted the community organization who now had enhanced amicus status to sign off on the settlement agreement and to give kind of the blessing to move forward. So I would say the AMAC gave kind of a mixed blessing of, we're not going to block this because there are important aspects of this settlement agreement that need to be implemented, but we also think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And so the AMAC was very clear about that position and has continued to advocate for many things that they think need to be corrected in the settlement agreement and beyond. So in February of 2014, the court held a 2-day fairness hearing. So has anybody ever participated in a fairness hearing or the one in this case? So when there is a significant, Bob, you're going to be the yes for all of these questions. So when there is the type of lawsuit that is brought and the settlement agreement is the type that was brought in this case, part of the procedural requirements is that the court hold what's called a fairness hearing so that members of the community at large can tell the court how they feel about it. And the question the court was seeking input on from the community was this settlement agreement fair, adequate, and reasonable? And so sometimes they take 1 day, sometimes they take 2 days. Here, it was a 2-day hearing, and it was a very powerful hearing. Many people from the community testified about their personal experiences with Portland Police Bureau, about their hopes for oversight, about their hopes for accountability. And it was, I think, a cathartic process for many people to be able to go to court to talk to a federal court judge who's overseeing the implementation of this agreement, who's going to weigh in and decide ultimately whether this agreement is appropriate in this case. And for people to speak directly to that judge, I think it was a very, Judge Simon did his best, I believe. The court did a really good job of making it accessible to people. The court allowed people to submit testimony by video if they couldn't show up, and provide for alternate formats or submit written testimony as well, and try to really make sure that people felt comfortable weighing in on this issue. And the court represented to everybody that the judge in the case read every piece of information and watched every video that was submitted, which I think is significant, and should be the standard, but I just don't know that it is. So it was a lot of people took a lot of comfort that they were being heard in a lot of different forums, not just through the AMAC, not just through the city channels, not just through the Department of Justice channels, but could speak also directly to the court on these issues. In March of 2014, the Portland Police Bureau shot and killed Kelly Vern Swoboda. In June of 2014, the police shot and killed Nicholas Glendon Davis, 23-year-old houseless individual. And on August 29th of 2014, Judge Simon accepted the settlement agreement, but he added a little tweak to it. He found that the settlement agreement was fair, adequate, and reasonable in substance, but procedurally, because of what he had heard at the fairness hearing, he went a little bit further. And Kristen's going to talk about that.
So I brought a copy of the settlement agreement with me in case anybody wants to look at it. It's also available online. It's 77 pages long, 190 paragraphs. It's quite the beast. And it's very detailed with timelines and a lot of specifics on what the police have to do. And it covers a lot of different areas. The main topics in the settlement agreement are use of force, training, community-based mental health services, crisis intervention, an employee information system, which is to track data and information, officer accountability, and then the community engagement and creation of a COAB, which is the Community Oversight Advisory Board. So it's a very elaborate agreement, and the wrinkle that the judge introduced into the agreement was that the parties would have to come back once a year to the courtroom and present on their progress on implementing the settlement agreement. Now, the settlement agreement is supposed to be implemented within 5 years, as we're going to find out we're at the 5-year mark almost, and we're not close, or they're not close, I should say. That kind of raised some issues with the city.
So part of what Judge Simon ordered was that there would be what's called an evidentiary hearing. And so for lawyers in the room, probably recognize, but for others, it means that people would be called on the stand and present evidence to the court. This was not something that was in the agreement, but it's certainly our position that that's fully within the authority of a district or a federal court judge to order information to be presented to the court about an agreement that he's has oversight of. And so he ordered that to happen and start in September of 2015, so a year from the date that he entered the agreement. And a month or so later, the city of Portland chose to appeal that ruling because they argued that the court did not have the legal authority to order the parties back to court and present evidence on compliance or non-compliance or the status of that. That was very confusing to many of us because the city was saying, we've already done most of this stuff. So if that was the case, we wondered, well, what's the problem then going to court and telling people about that? So the city appealed it, and that once an appeal is filed, it kind of stops the proceedings while it's resolved on appeal on the Ninth Circuit in federal court. So that kind of paused everything for a while, and that was back in October of 2014. Despite the appeal, the city and DOJ kept moving on with implementation. So the city hired, part of the agreement, there was the COAB, the Community Oversight Advisory Board. There was also this position called the COCL, the Community Oversight Community Liaison. Those two were to be kind of melded in a certain way. And the AMAC participated in the selection process in the sense that gave recommendations of several folks or groups that were seeking to get that contract for the COCL position, which would do kind of data analysis and a lot of the technical pieces of the oversight process with the agreement. The AMAC and several other groups made a recommendation of who they thought should get the contract. The city hired a different group out of Chicago that didn't have a Portland community-based tie. They eventually hired former Chief Justice Jimenez from the Oregon Supreme Court as their kind of local anchor, and the city went ahead and awarded them the contract for $315,000 per year for the 5-year anticipated contract term. In November, Portland Police Bureau hired additional people, data analysis, and made plans to hire a mental health specialist to help develop those community relationships and work with the COCL group, the Rosenbaum group. In February of 2015, this community oversight board started meeting. It was about 20 people or so from the community who were tasked with oversight of implementation of the agreement. In March of 2015, Judge Jimenez had taken the role of kind of chair of the community oversight board, working with the community liaison, the COCL group, and they cited the office inside a precinct, which many people inside a police precinct and many people in the community reacted very strongly to that, because here you have somebody who's supposed to be a liaison with the community who is impacted by these allegations of excessive force by the police bureau, and they cited the office of this person who's to engage with the community in a police department, which felt that it didn't take into account that most people are going to be fearful about engaging with a community-based organizer if that they have to go through a police precinct to have those engagements. So there was a lot of criticism on that, and they also relied on the city, who's the defendant in this case, to provide a lot of the administrative support, and that also struck people a lot as kind of not the appropriate way to handle this. The perception was that if this organization is in collusion with the defendant in this case, they're not going to be somebody that people trust going to and trust with their stories and feeling vulnerable and trying to engage with this organization when trying to talk about police reform. And in March also of 2015, police shot and killed Christopher Ryan Healy, a 36-year-old houseless person. In April of 2015, Judge Jimenez resigns as the Portland representative, and Kathleen Sadat, a local activist, very well respected, steps into that position in May of 2015. In June of 2015, police shot and killed 29-year-old Alan Lee Bellew. In July of 2015, both parties to the U.S. Meanwhile, all this is going on, and the Ninth Circuit appeal is still pending. And as part of that appeal, there's a Ninth Circuit mediation process that all the parties participated in. And as a result of that mediation process, the parties submitted a proposed order to Judge Simon that was modified, that took away this evidentiary role of the court. So it didn't say, Judge Simon's original order said, produce evidence and testify. So the modified order that the parties reached said, no evidentiary hearing, but the court can, the parties can talk about status and the court can ask questions. And a key part of that was that the Community Oversight Advisory Board, this community oversight board that was created out of the settlement agreement, would self-select somebody from their own group to also talk to the court about the status of implementation and the COAB's perspective. And again, that was significant, at least to the AMAC, right, because it brought a community voice into the process. So the AMAC was going to be able to talk to the court. The DOJ could talk to the court. The city can talk to the court. The Portland Police Association could talk to the court. But this actually was a direct line to those who were engaged, community members who were engaged in the oversight process. So that we saw as a significant part of this. In August of 2015, the city voted to increase Rosenbaum and Watson's contract, that's the COCL group, from $315,000 a year to $458,000 a year. In November of 2015, Portland Police, did I skip something? Oh, okay, I skipped the, in September of 2015 was the first annual status conference.
And that was what was agreed to is the settlement agreement, where we'd all go to court and report on how the progress is being made on implementation of the settlement agreement. So the Department of Justice wrote their report on what they felt like had been complied with so far, and very detailed, line by line, indicating whether there was some compliance, no compliance. And so at that point, we were, 2 years in to the settlement agreement implementation, or technically 1 year. And the Department of Justice found that the city had partially complied with a number of the specifics in the settlement agreement, but no full compliance on any of them, and no full compliance on any one of those areas, or even partial compliance on any complete one of those areas. Interestingly, that first year, the Community Oversight Board piece was not reported on by the Department of Justice. They just didn't even measure whether there had been any progress there. At that point, there had already been some turnover on the Community Oversight Board, and the Department of Justice had asked the city for a proposal on how to fill the seats on the Community Oversight Board and how to improve that process. So we were already seeing some problems at that stage, but no real solutions being offered.
So in April of, fast forward a year, that was 2015. Now we're finally in 2016, and the parties are continuing to work on these issues. The AMAC is continuing to engage with the Department of Justice and the city about these critical issues, and continuing to engage with the community. In April of 2016 is when then Chief O'Day resigned because of the shooting incident where he shot his friend on a hunting trip. In June of 2016, the COAB board chair at the time, Kathleen Sadat, resigned from her position, and several members of the COAB resigned as well. And so who here had followed any of those stories that were reported about the issues that were going on with the COAB? So there was a lot of disruptions, right, that were going on during these meetings. A lot of people have different opinions on why that happened and how it should be addressed. But I think it is significant that there was concerns from many members of the community about engaging with the Community Oversight Board. There were many concerns with the Community Oversight Board itself. The COAB, as an entity, issued many recommendations to the DOJ and the city about how about implementation of this settlement agreement. And many of those recommendations, at this point, you'll hear a little bit later that the COAB is no longer active. But a lot of people put in a lot of time and effort and thoughtfulness into those recommendations, and that's something that is worth a further conversation. In August of 2016, the DOJ and the city agreed over the AMAC's objection to suspend all COCL and COAB functions for 60 days because of these disruptions and because they were trying to get some breathing room to figure it out. The AMAC's concerns. We'll talk about that.
So, I want to point out that I think there are a lot of different opinions on some of the troubles that the COAB had, but I think there's pretty wide agreement that the COAB was not very well trained, that they did not have enough resources, that they did not have the administrative support that they needed, and that there really wasn't a lot of good direction on exactly how they were to be spending their time and what outcomes they were supposed to achieve. So it's a pretty big group of people from all different parts of the community and all different levels of experience and education and, great resources, tons to offer, but you need some direction with any group that big. And so I think that we can all agree that that was one of the major failings of that initial COAB. And so the city wanted to, and was successful in getting a 60-day hiatus where the COAB just stopped meeting altogether to try to craft a new COAB. The AMAC was very clear that we're not creating a whole new great system in 60 days, so let's go with what we've got and work on a system in the meantime so that we can continue to have community engagement and not have that interruption with the community. And so the AMAC began meeting with the city and really working on how to address some of these issues, how to improve and make a better COAB that was more productive and successful, and to keep the link, emphasizing always keeping the link with the community and keeping the community informed so that we didn't have the situation that we have now where we don't have a connection that is set up through the settlement agreement between the parties to the agreement and the community.
So after that hiatus was approved by the Department of Justice, this was October, we're looking at October of 2016, and this is when the city negotiated a contract with the Portland Police Association, the police union mid-contract, and incorporated one or two or a few issues with the settlement agreement, but failed to address several other key issues with the settlement agreement and changes that members of the community that have been involved in police oversight had been pushing for many, many, many years. And so I don't know if anybody was aware of that as well, but City Council ended up reconvening upstairs behind a wall of police officers to approve that contract over the objection of many, many community members. So I raise that because I think that these are ongoing issues where we're continuing to engage and people are continuing to voice their opposition and opinion to how things are being handled, and yet it happens. October of 2016 was the second annual status conference with Judge Simon, and during that status conference,
so again, the Department of Justice reported on where the city was in compliance and where they were not. There was partial compliance in the use of force area, in training, in their employee information systems, and their officer accountability, and substantial compliance with a lot of the community-based mental health services. And so they did have some progress to report at that hearing. However, there was a big red highlighted section in the community engagement and oversight piece, and the Department of Justice found that the city was not in compliance with that piece because the COAB was not functioning and there was no plan in place to make it so. And let's see. So, as those of you who attended the presentation before with Adrienne Brown, we heard a lot about the behavioral health unit and the work that they've done on the state mental health performance plan implementation and working with the community and people in crisis. And so I do think there is some recognition there of progress that has been made, and that was definitely highlighted in that conference. But it was with this backdrop of this disengagement with the community and connection with people who were voicing what they were actually experiencing on the street and in their interactions with police.
So in that status conference, Judge Simon heard from the parties and then opened up the floor essentially to community members who wanted to weigh in on their feelings on the status of the settlement agreement. The hearing extended a little bit longer, I think, than most people had anticipated. And and because the COAB had been on this pause and certainly the AMAC raised concerns, the representative from the Community Oversight Board appeared and testified on an agreed statement that the COAB had agreed on and also raised concerns about this. So in response, Judge Simon said, well, let's come back in 30 days and we'll hear what's going on. Since you asked for additional time, I want to know what's happening. I want you to report back to me. So at the end of that, the court ordered the parties to come back in 30 days, essentially. And the city then filed what's called a writ of mandamus, asking the Ninth Circuit to say, no, the district court, again, Judge Simon does not have the authority to do this. Again, we believe that is not with legal support, but it's certainly within the right of the city to attempt that. In December of 2016, so that hearing in 30 days didn't go forward, right? Because the city had filed this writ of mandamus up to the Ninth Circuit about it. In addition, the city also asked for Judge Simon to be removed from the case. And in December of 2016, Portland police shot and killed Stephen Wayne Leifel. Later in December of 2016, that was when the appeal or the writ of mandamus was filed, and it's a pretty narrow issue about whether or not the judge could order the parties back again about the scope of the court's authority. So even with that, the city and the DOJ and the court are still can continue to engage in the implementation of the agreement. In January of 2017, the COAB held its last meeting, and Mayor Wheeler at this point is now the mayor. He basically resigned all the members of the COAB, including the ones who had offered to stay and help the next COAB board transition and provide that background and knowledge. In February of 2017, Portland police shot and killed 17-year-old African-American Quantas Hayes. In March of 2017, the city and the DOJ agreed to mediate in the Ninth Circuit. Once you file an appeal or a writ, the Ninth Circuit tries to resolve the issues between the parties. And so the Ninth Circuit had offered to do that, and that mediation is currently ongoing regarding the city's writ of mandamus for Judge Simon's order. There's no plan, as far as we know, to reinstate the COAB. And then most recently in May of 2017, Portland police shot and killed Terrell Kareem Johnson here in Portland. So that brings us up to today. And the reason why we went through that extensive background is because it's been a long process, and I think it's important to note that interspersed, there is still uses of force going on. There's still being use of force against predominantly those with mental health issues, community members of color, and why it's important to stay engaged in this process, even though it can get tiresome.
That's a long journey, but it's even longer than that than what we've just outlined in the last 7 years. I want to talk a little bit about the AMC, the Albino Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. Back in the late 2000s, Kendra James, young African-American mother, was pulled out of a car, and in the process of trying to pull her out of the car, she was shot, and as an end result, her life was lost. It was at that time that the Albino Ministerial Alliance began to bring together people across the community to talk about the injustice and what could be done about the accountability issues and reform for. He's got me, dealing with these things, and I don't use these type of mics. But we're gonna try to get through it today. So if you see me moving in a whole lot, it's because he's telling me to do so. To formulate that and join together to talk about how do we bring about reform and accountability within our own police structure here in the city of Portland. Well, after the 2010 shooting and ending of officer-involved shooting that ended in the death of Aaron Campbell, where he was shot in the back by an AR-15 lethal round, we began to say that Dr. Haynes and myself, we had a conversation that we've gone as far as we could locally. And it was at that point that we could seem to get no district attorney cooperation, no city cooperation, that we then made a statement. I know the city of Portland says we asked for the investigation by the Department of Justice. And yes, they did ask for a criminal investigation into the civil rights in the Aaron Campbell case. They agreed, and all our constituents on the Hill of Capitol Hill agreed. But it was the AMC at that same press conference at North Precinct, following then Commissioner Dan Salzman, that I stated that we are calling for an investigation of patterns and practices into the Portland Police Bureau. And it was on that DOJ investigation began. Yes, they had to talk to the city and get the approval for them to come and do it. Once that settlement agreement was put into place, we then did file and became what is known as an enhanced amicus status, which is something no community group has been given before, and since that time has not been given, so we consider that a great milestone. The model that this settlement agreement is built upon is different than that of having a court-ordered monitor, where the court-ordered monitor reports directly back to the court. We have the community being involved along with the other parties to talk about what is good for the community. Sometimes when we're doing things, the powers that be tend to forget that they became the powers that be because the citizens made them the powers to be, because the citizens believed that they were going to represent them fairly and do what was at the best for them. We have come to learn, and sometimes we don't get that lesson learned, because at each other election following, we hear the same things of promises of what will be done, and then we get the same old soup warmed over again once they take the office. We don't see real change or transformation. Somehow we're going to have to bring about that change and transformation. So as we move forward, what's the experience like of being the coalition? Understand now, the coalition does not speak for the entire city of Portland. We do not speak for any or all of the ethnic hues, but we are a voice, and we are a group of about 25 or more different organizations that have come together around 5 principles, all based on the nonviolent principles as enhanced and taught by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We continue to do those. Some of the things we wanted is we want a special prosecutor in cases where there is officer-involved shootings. We also wanted to strengthen the IPR, the Independent Police Review Group, to have subpoena power, as well as to be able to bring officers in and help hold them accountable. We wanted the removal of what was known as the 48-hour rule, where an officer, once they had shot or were involved in using lethal force, had 48 hours to go and then come back and write their report. No such thing was given. I was told once that, well, if you're asked and you don't want to answer, then all you have to do is walk away. Yes, let a black man try to walk away from an officer and say, I don't want to talk to you right now. Then suddenly it escalates that you are, trying not to be arrested. And my life is a little bit more too precious for me for that to happen, and too precious for many of the others, not only African Americans, but those who are Latinos and Browns, and even those who are white as well. What happened to James Chassie is a tragedy. And still to this day, I don't know of an officer that has yet been held responsible or accountable for that. Every time there's an officer-involved shooting that results in death or in custody death, it is always justified by, I feared for my life. And so therefore, if I use those words, I am justified in using lethal force that can take a person's life. We want to, as part of one of our principles, see the Oregon legislature change that law so that it is to that of a reasonable person, not just because I feared for my life. Still, the answer is, I feared for my life. Still, there has not been any officer in Portland Police Bureau's history that has been indicted. One. See, and it was a negligence case. See, she just had to blow all my thunder up, that one. But you know, that's sad when it's just one. What else am I'm to talk about the COAB, the Community Oversight Advisory Board, and why it was so important and why it is still important today. It's been now 116 days to my count since the COAB has been totally dismissed. The COAB was brought about, it was to have 5 citizens that would be selected at large, 5 persons, one from 5 supplied by the police
As advisory members.
as advisory members.
The Commission on Disability, Human Rights Commission, each got one and got to choose another one.
And got to choose 3.
Got to choose 3, and then
there was 5, one appointed by each of our city commissioners, and the contractor, the COCO, was responsible to the entire city commission council and not just one. So that was the 20 people that we had. It is important for a community to be able to share and to speak, because what happens is we do get media coverage, we do get others who talk, but there is more gain by having coffee, talking to individuals, and if individual citizens do not have an understanding of what's going on, or do not feel as if they are being heard when they talk about the things that are affecting them. When we talk about the amount of force that is being used, if today one person is pulled over and there is this quote-unquote suspicious list that's known as the gang list, and once you get put on that list, you get special treatment if they pull you over. It takes about 7 officers in cars to all surround 1 or 2 people to talk about what is happening. We saw in the Keaton Otis case, Keaton Otis was followed by 2 officers because the officer saw him driving with a hoodie on, that's a little sweatshirt with a hood on it, and said that, you know, he can't drive that car. That car is too good for him to drive, so something has got to be wrong, and so they followed him. When he makes a turn and does not signal, now be truthful. How many of you have ever been behind a police officer and watched them make turns and they don't signal? They cut over on you. That's when I wish I had a siren that I could just blow them down, write them a ticket for, you didn't give me a signal within 100 feet and you didn't turn your signal on at all. So he was stopped because of that. And then over 21 bullets were fired. One of those bullets went from the scene all the way over to where the Radio Shack store was and went through the window there. It was said that Keaton Otis had a gun that was in the Crown Royal sack, and he shot an officer. Now, it's strange with all the modern technology we have that so far as I know, the bullet that was fired from the gun has not been identified. And I could be wrong, but I'm saying as far as I know. And as far as I know, they never found the gun in the car. but he's dead, so he can't tell the story. But we do know that he said to those who were passing by, please don't leave me, they're going to kill me. James J. Perez pulled over, asked for ID. Why did you pull him over? He is driving a car that does not fit the neighborhood. Now that officer insulted everybody who lived in St. John's, saying that if your car isn't clean and if your car isn't in nice condition, it shouldn't be in St. John's, because all folk in St. John's can drive are dirty cars and beat up cars. Can I take you all the way back to Tony Stevens to talk about the mentality? If you say don't choke them, smoke them, somebody is moved from, we're going to kill them either way. So since they tell us we can't choke them, let's just go out and shoot them. Until we have an officer who just a few weeks ago, leaving roll call, says, now, here's the joke of the day. Let's go out and shoot some black folk. Oh, none of you all laughed. It's not a laughing matter, but it shows the mentality of an officer, a mentality that is in our bureau. So as community citizens, this is what we're dealing with as we continue to move, and why we believe that the COAB needs to be reinstated to be able to give voice to the ordinary people, to give information, to question, make suggestions as to how this can be improved. We ask your support that when the council begins to look at this again, that they would go ahead and put this together. So the city is out of compliance because it has not held the COAB meetings. Now, when the COAB was having its issues and all of but one of the city council's appointees resigned, the city council refused to put anybody in place because they wanted to rechange and make the COAB something different. So they intentionally made the city stay in non-compliance. We want the Department of Justice to bring about accountability. You may have read that I said from the very first meeting that we had of a status conference when we were putting this together, I said to Judge Simon in federal court, it's in the record so you can go and check it, that he needed to keep a hammer, because whenever there is a problem, somebody has to drop the hammer on this. In the last status report conference, I again made a reference to the hammer, and the hammer needed to be dropped. Even though Judge Simon got credit for that quote, which he currently said, read the record and you'll see that it was Dr. Bethel who made that quote, I confessed it was me. If you have any other questions, I know our time is getting there, and I have to turn over to my two counselors over here now before they bill me for going overtime.
So I think that is the thorough background and historical context, which brings us to today. And so we wanted to hear questions from folks about whether, any questions that people have about the process. I think the reason for going into this much detail is because throughout this process, as I said earlier, there's opportunities for engagement. And as providers of mental health services, or as advocates for folks with mental health issues, we need the city, the DOJ. Really, you need to be a part of this process. We played a specific role by leveraging the legal system in a certain way, but a part of us using that system and part of us leveraging that system is to provide a space for people to interact with this settlement agreement and to give feedback about the settlement agreement and to understand the settlement agreement. And it's confusing and it's complicated, but it's incredibly important because it's impacting everyone in this room, and especially folks that y'all provide services and advocacy for. Yes. So any questions? Really? Okay, yeah.
Well, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, putting together what you were describing, where are there any sort of specific outlines in the settlement about what the role of healthcare providers is
Right. So the question is, what's the role of mental health providers in this process? And I think that everybody on this panel probably has different opinions, and Joanne also might have an opinion too. But I think a big part is that it's not, I mean, part of the settlement agreement relates to use of force and de-escalation and better training for engagement for people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. And there is a great deal of fear, at least I've heard, from folks in the community and folks who have mental health issues about engaging with the police because they fear force being used on them, or they just have fear of engagement for a variety of reasons. And the purpose of the Community Oversight Advisory Board is they hold open meetings and they welcome people to come and hear about implementation of this agreement and provide feedback about how the city is doing, specifically the Police Bureau is doing in the trainings, in the de-escalation, in providing better responsive services to people who are in mental health crisis, rather than going straight to use of force or going straight to taking people into custody. And so if there are things that are working for your clients, or if there's things that are not, I think that the COAB provides a space and a place to hear that feedback. And otherwise, it's police officers' perspective about what works and what doesn't work, or it's city council members' experience or feedback or thoughts about what works and what doesn't work. But I think that there has been a great movement to require or to hear from those who are most impacted. And so I see the providers and the advocates as being able to facilitate people who are most impacted by police interactions to help them voice their concerns or their approval or their disapproval or whatever, to be able to facilitate that information to the city through the COAB or whatever entity that is there to receive that information. But the folks that are most impacted by police violence really need to be heard about how they are impacted and how they think that changes should and could be made. Because otherwise, it's people who don't have that lived experience deciding what is the best thing, and historically that has not worked.
So the AMA Coalition has a website and a listserv, and that is a very good way to stay connected with what's going on. And when there are opportunities for folks to come and provide testimony or share their stories, there's been a lot of flexibility in how stories can be shared via video, letters, and whatnot. So in your role as providers and advocates, if you're able to collect some of that information and share some of it with any interactions with the police, with reactions to things that people hear in the news or read about the settlement agreement, all of that is extremely helpful, and the AMA Coalition can help keep you connected on when that's going on. We hope and anticipate that there will be a third status conference in court this fall, and we hope that the community will be able to testify at that as well. And we've also had providers and advocates testify at those hearings on behalf of their patients and clients. So that's also another way to make those voices heard. I think that's probably the most important thing I can think of.
So the question was, what is the current status, given that the Ninth Circuit writ of mandamus is ongoing, Kathleen Sadat has resigned and has not been replaced, and the COAB is no longer meeting and no longer in existence. So what is the way to engage is the question. So just this week, the AMAC did hold, so in the absence of a COAB, the AMAC has organized, I think, two events thus far in that absence, in that vacuum, of community events for people to give feedback about the agreement. This is a community volunteer organization without the kind of infrastructure that the COAB did in fact have at the time when it was existing. But nonetheless, the AMA really values trying to get people's input, so held these two community forums to seek input and feedback from community members, and members of the COCL were there to provide information and answer questions and that sort of thing. So I don't have a good answer for you, because I think that's one of the issues, is there is a vacuum of how to provide community feedback and input right now to this process. Right.
Any way that you can sign up to get information
Okay. Yeah. So question about how to sign up to get information. And I see Joanne Hardesty right behind you raising her hand.
But you can sign up from their website, and they will send you any information that comes up. But you could also sign up to the AMAC's Facebook page, which always is updated with the most up-to-date information about what's coming next. But I also would encourage the mental health community to host your own meeting. Nothing prevents you from stepping into the void and calling the COCO and saying, our community wants to hear from you. Our community wants to have input into your report. And so it would be my hope that you would have your own meeting, and that, just like Christian suggested, that you come to the status conference. We don't have enough engagement from people from the mental health community. And we know people suffering from mental health issues, it's not the environment for them to come and engage, right? With the uniforms, with the weapons, it is like the worst possible environment to bring someone who's experiencing mental health. And so as providers and activists, I would hope that you would step into that void and start reading those reports, commenting on those reports, taking it to your members, getting information from the people you work with, your colleagues, and say, how do we influence this? Because I believe, we've been doing this ever since the DOJ's been in town, and I see they give us the passport look when we provide them information that we've been providing them since day one. And so having new faces and new voices providing the exact same information will be very, very helpful, because we're all in this together, right? If it doesn't work for you, it's certainly not working for the community that I serve.
Joanne, do you know off the top of your head what the COCL website is?
Yes, actually, if you go to your search engine and put COCL-COAB and hit enter, it'll come up.
I also want to, sorry, really quickly. So some folks who have not read this report, which is probably most people in this room, or the reports that come out, it's also important that you understand it. So if there's feedback that you have about how to make it more user-friendly, or if there's something you don't quite understand, that's incredibly valuable feedback for the authors of the report to have. Because again, we want this to be accessible. We want people to understand this. This is community-based work here. And so it's important for the folks that are going to be impacted by this can understand it and digest it.
Question in the rear.
You mentioned issues with the first iteration of the COAB, administrative support, lack of direction. How would you see this next iteration being more successful?
So the question was about the first iteration of the COAB, lack of administrative support, lack of direction. How would we see the second one, this next iteration, being more successful?
We'll begin first with making sure that whoever wants to serve on this new COAB has read the settlement agreement, number one. Many folks said to us, yes, I've read the agreement, but we didn't double check that, and so a lot of them who got on there and no real clue what was contained in those 77 pages. Secondly, is going to be some training that trains them as to what they're to do, so they'll know about the laws, public meeting laws, and all those things that kept popping up at different times, that instead of being able to make a step forward, it kept pushing the COAB 2 steps backwards. When it got to the place where it was limited in terms of how the public could comment and speak at those meetings, it began to cause an issue. We're going to work through those things so that when this new COAB or COAB 2 comes out, it will have an opportunity for citizens to participate, for those who are serving to know that it takes more than 10 hours a month to be a part of COAB. It would take you almost 10 hours to read the 77-page report and gain some understanding. But then there's other things that come as people bring data. So we want to make sure that they have the necessary training for that. That number 3 or 4, where I forgot the count number, they need to have the administrative support and that support be of such that it is going to be an enhancement and encouragement for them to do their work and not a detractor. That what I mean by that, it's hard to get information from the fox as to how to keep the fox out of the hen house, because the fox is not going to tell you the real truth. Will always have a door to get in to get a chicken whenever it wants one. So those types of things, so that this COAB is very well trained, that it is broad-based as well, and that we bring it back to the place where the citizens are more, for me, that there's much more citizen involvement, although all 20 were citizens, but being from the at-large community to be involved, to speak, as opposed to having so much that was on the other side.
We also, AMAC also had some specific recommendations about removing barriers such as childcare and transportation, things like stipends, to make it so that people can attend this. They're volunteering their time, and when those things get in the way, it's really hard to be dedicated to doing the work. And everybody was very dedicated to doing the work. They just needed that extra support doing that. So now we've identified some of those things. Those are a big priority.
And it takes a lot. It takes a lot of kind of focus. It takes a lot of time and energy and effort. And not everybody on the Community Oversight Board had the same opinions, right? So it takes the extra energy to engage with people in a respectful way. And, you know, we recognize that it's asking a lot of people. So part of it is, even if you're not on the COAB, support people that are. And how do you, ask them, what can I do to support you? And we realize that it is asking a lot of people to engage in this at this level. But quite honestly, it's important because the stakes are high. Everybody wants to go home safely. I do believe that. That's what, Dan Handelman, another member of our steering committee, says quite often. And as our chairs have said too, everybody wants to go home safely. Police want to go home safely. Community members want to go home safely. We all want everybody to get home safely to their families and to their homes. But we got to work at it because there are times when that is not happening, and that is not acceptable. And we all have the shared responsibility to make sure that it happens. So the question was about the first iteration of the COAB, lack of administrative support, lack of direction. How would we see the second one, this next iteration, being more successful?
We'll begin first with making sure that whoever wants to serve on this new COAB has read the settlement agreement, number one. Many folks said to us, yes, I've read the agreement, but we didn't double check that, and so a lot of them who got on there and no real clue what was contained in those 77 pages. Secondly, is going to be some training that trains them as to what they're to do, so they'll know about the laws, public meeting laws, and all those things that kept popping up at different times, that instead of being able to make a step forward, it kept pushing the COAB 2 steps backwards. When it got to the place where it was limited in terms of how the public could comment and speak at those meetings, it began to cause an issue. We're going to work through those things so that when this new COAB or COAB 2 comes out, it will have an opportunity for citizens to participate, for those who are serving to know that it takes more than 10 hours a month to be a part of COAB. It would take you almost 10 hours to read the 77-page report and gain some understanding. But then there's other things that come as people bring data. So we want to make sure that they have the necessary training for that. That number 3 or 4, where I forgot the count number, they need to have the administrative support, and that support be of such that it is going to be an enhancement and encouragement for them to do their work and not a detractor. That what I mean by that, it's hard to get information from the fox as to how to keep the fox out of the hen house, because the fox is not going to tell you the real truth. Will always have a door to get in to get a chicken whenever it wants one. So those types of things, so that this COAB is very well trained, that it is broad-based as well, and that we bring it back to the place where the citizens are more, for me, that there's much more citizen involvement, although all 20 were citizens, but being from the at-large community to be involved, to speak, as opposed to having so much that was on the other side.
AMAC also had some specific recommendations about removing barriers such as childcare and transportation, things like stipends, to make it so that people can attend this. They're volunteering their time, and when those things get in the way, it's really hard to be dedicated to doing the work. And everybody was very dedicated to doing the work. They just needed that extra support doing that. So now we've identified some of those things. Those are a big priority.
And it takes a lot. It takes a lot of kind of focus. It takes a lot of time and energy and effort. And not everybody on the Community Oversight Board had the same opinions, right? So it takes the extra energy to engage with people in a respectful way. And, you know, we recognize that it's asking a lot of people. So part of it is, even if you're not on the COAB, support people that are. And how do you, ask them, what can I do to support you? And we realize that it is asking a lot of people to engage in this at this level. But quite honestly, it's important because the stakes are high. Everybody wants to go home safely. I do believe that. That's what, Dan Handelman, another member of our steering committee, says quite often. And as our chairs have said too, everybody wants to go home safely. Police want to go home safely. Community members want to go home safely. We all want everybody to get home safely to their families and to their homes. But we got to work at it because there are times when that is not happening, and that is not acceptable. And we all have the shared responsibility to make sure that it happens.
Couple of questions. So if I'm looking at the website for the COAB, there's no events or anything happening other than what I think is June 14th. And then I'm looking at the Facebook page. So is that because, obviously we're trying to get this, established again. Is there a time frame for when you want to have this, new COAB happen? Obviously you wanted that yesterday, but is there kind of, I don't know, I'm trying to think about the vision for when you want to have it happen.
So the question was, there's nothing on the social media or the website about next scheduled events. So what's the time frame that we would like to see something happen with the COAB? Obviously ASAP, but also but I'll let you answer this one.
Yeah, we want to see it as soon as possible. We're counting the days, and on the forum that we held on Wednesday, there were members from the DOJ and the city present at the forum, and I told them that I think it was 148 days we wanted to see the COAB in place. That only gave them 14 more days. And so that's the urgency of the need of having this to come to pass. It's going to take some time, but we had the AMAC, DOJ, PPA, and the city. We had sat down, we began in January, or even before that, to start talking about how do we replace people on the COAB and get this thing put together. We thought we had a good plan going, and then suddenly things changed. One of the first things that I mentioned to Judge Dominguez at the first meeting of the COAB at the library off of 122nd, I think I've got the right street over, yeah, when we started, was there is no provision to get and provide new members to the COAB. We need to start on this now. He agreed, but it never got started. When we got down to about 4 or 5 alternates left, we began to seriously start working on that. So it's been something we've been working on for a while. Would like to say, if I had my way, I'd like to see the COAB have been seated in January, but it didn't. But truly, by the end of this year, at the latest, I would like to see the COAB up and running, which meant they have had to have gone through all of the training to be ready to start towards the end of the year.
Dr. Buck?
Joanne?
I was just going to say, though, we should say, though, we have no control over that. It's totally up to the city and the DOJ.
And where the AMAC coalition meets and
The AMAC Coalition meets the first Thursday of every month. We start at 5 o'clock. We meet at Maranatha Church. That's on the corner of 13th and Skidmore. Little building there on the corner. Enter through the center doors. It's open. You're always welcome to come, hear the information, and give us input as well. We look forward to seeing you. We're on break for July and August. We're taking a vacation. But if anything comes up, we'll be back. But then the next time we'll come back will be first Thursday in September is our next scheduled meeting. We look forward to seeing as many of you as possible who come and be there.
And you, like I said before, you can keep involved and informed through the AMAC's listserv. So that's something you can sign up for, and all the events will be presented on that. And as well as that, we would like to hear more people going to our city council and going to our mayor and asking that these actions start happening, asking questions about why we don't have a COAB and when are we going to have one, because we should have had one in January. The AMAC has been working very diligently on that, but as Joanne mentioned, we are one voice that's constantly nagging them about a lot of things. So any ability that you have to express those concerns directly to the city, I think would definitely help.
So the question was about how to, if there are opportunities or there are community-based meetings to discuss this, how do we publicize those? And the question was on the AMAC website. And I see Joanne's shaking her head. She's kind of our one of the main organizers. But I think, yes, contact the AMAC and we can help publicize that information to our lists. I mean, we really want to encourage people to engage. So if people are interested in taking that up and organizing something, you definitely have our support. Yeah. So there is a status conference that's currently on the court's docket, and it might be moved. So we were going to put it on when we've finally gotten that finalized. But thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. It is 312 CV 02265-SI, and that's in Oregon District Court with Judge Simon. Right. And many of the documents that have been filed are on the DOJ's website that Ms. Brown showed in the last session, but if you just type in Department of Justice or USA versus City of Portland and kind of Google it, you'll get to the DOJ website, or the COCL website has a library page on their website, and it's got many of the important documents on the library page. The AMA Coalition has a website, Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition, also has many of the documents on their website. So this stuff is readily available. And if you can't find that, you can email the AMAC and we can help facilitate getting that information.
Thank you so much for coming and being a part of this session. I was thinking of something when I think back to the COAB, and it's something we all go through, is that as we come together as a group of people to work on something, the first thing that we have to do is learn how to storm together. It's kind of get a little stormy. But after we go through a storming period, we have to come to a place where we start to form. That's coming together. And then we get to the normative part where we start to norm. And then guess what? You start all over again, but you never stop. We never stop. Because when you stop, that's when everything goes away. Let's continue to put our hands in each other's hands and demand to ensure that what needs to happen for persons with mental illnesses or perceived to have a mental illness is treated fairly. We no longer want families to post or to say, if your family member or your friend is in a mental health crisis, do not call the police. That's a bad statement. Bad statement, but yet it was carrying truth, because what was happening was not help. but death or injury. And we don't want to see that. I believe with everything within me, as I am a minister by trade, profession, I don't like folk in my profession who act up. And I am one of the ones who quickly go and say, you're going to straighten up, be held accountable, or you need to stop. I say the same thing for our officers. There are good officers, but that apple that ruins the whole barrel needs to be dealt with, held accountable, and say, stop it, and don't just hit them on the hand or the wrist. Terminate them, because it's too much at stake for those who are the good trying to combat those few who are the bad. Let's go out, good folk, and let's support the good folk to bring about what we need for all of the folk. Have a great day.